好，繼續面向中間。好，請望望左手邊。好，繼續左手邊。好，唔該。唔
該，望咗張右手邊，跟住喺呢度，唔該。
好，攝影機需唔需要 ？OK， 好，唔該。好，請問夠未呢 ？OK， 好，請會長同兩位副會長就座。好，以下落嚟嘅時間呢，我有請會長、兩位副會長同埋我哋嘅副秘書長為我哋介紹香港律師會基本法第23條立法嘅意見書，唔該。
Testing。好，首先歡迎各位出席今日嘅我哋嘅記者招待會。政府喺2024年1月30日就基本法第23條立法展開為期1個月嘅諮詢工作。呢個公開嘅諮詢呢，當律師會收到之後呢，我哋就立刻展開我哋嘅內部嘅程序嘅工作啦。我哋喺期間呢，諮詢期間呢，收到會員嘅意見啦，而我哋屬下嘅2個專責委員會，分別係憲制及人權事務委員會啦，同埋刑法及訴訟程序委員會。呢2個專責委員會呢，亦都詳細研究咗政府嘅諮詢文件。當然最後理事會亦都反覆再討論呢份諮詢文件啦，分析咗諮詢文件內容。律師會理事會整理咗有關意見之後呢，今日呢2月27日啦，就向政府提交咗意見書。向政府提出唔同具建設性建議，意見書亦都會上載到去律師會嘅網站嘅，歡迎大家可以下載。喺研究諮詢文件嘅同時呢，律師會過去1個月呢，亦都同唔同嘅持份者啦，包括律師會嘅會員啦、外國嘅商會啦、多國嘅領事啦，或者佢哋嘅代表呢，係交流見面嘅。律師會咧喺領事同商會收到翻嚟嘅信息呢，大家都係認同23條立法係香港特區政府嘅憲制責任。律師會亦都希望借住今日呢個記者會，向大家做一個簡介嘅。關於律師會嘅意見書當中，首先希望大家理解一點呢，就係而家呢個諮詢期呢，係關於23條嘅立法原則嘅，而並非一條草案。所以咧喺律師會提交呢個意見呢，亦都只限於呢一啲立法嘅原則。等到立法建議嘅草案正式出爐之後呢，律師會會作出一個更加深入嘅審視嘅。就23條條例嘅具體內容，例如相關嘅刑罰啦、嘅量刑嘅等級啦、 律師會喺目前為止認為當局提交嘅草案之前呢，律師會係唔適合評論住，係等到個草案出咗台呢，我哋先正式去評論嘅。即係頭先提到關於量刑同埋呢個相關刑罰嘅問題。另外，律師會係律師會意見書裏邊呢，亦都會提出咗建議喺條例中引入公眾利益作為辯護理由嘅一啲睇法嘅。咁我一陣會同大家分享多少少關於呢一個公眾利益作為辯護理由呢一點嘅。律師會意見書內提出嘅意見呢，包括以下6點嘅，大家可以喺呢個 PPT 睇到啦。第一，憲制責任；第二，法律專業保密權及私隱；第三，煽動意圖相關罪行；竊取國家機密相關罪行；境外干預罪同埋域外適用性呢個問題。最後我哋都提到一啲關於完善訴訟程序嘅問題嘅。首先，憲制責任方面，香港律師會認為23條嘅立法工作十分之重要。基本法第23條訂明香港特別行政區應自行立法，以禁止某些危害國家安全嘅行為。第23條立法係香港特別行政區嘅憲制責任同義務。第23條立法應予優先處理，並應該盡快完成。喺平衡憲制責任同埋保障權利呢，我亦都想講兩句嘅。保障國家安全嘅立法工作，以及保障香港居民嘅人權，呢兩件事並非零和遊戲。我深信香港優良嘅司法及法律傳統之下，兩者係可以得到一個合理嘅平衡嘅。從法律角度去睇，履行憲制責任嘅同時，立法內容亦都應該適當保障香港居民喺日常生活同埋商業活動，以及喺公民權利及政治權利國際公約同埋經濟社會與文化權利的國際公約適用於香港嘅條文下所保障嘅權利，呢兩者應該要取得平衡。以下落嚟想提一提法律專業保密權及私隱。香港律師會歡迎政府喺諮詢文件中認同法律專業保密權嘅重要性。律師對於同客戶嘅專業通訊同埋涉及當事人嘅資料係有保密責任。咁係因為確保咗當事人可以進行全面毫無保留嘅溝通，保障律師唔會因為冇披露受法律專業保密權保障嘅內容而誤墮法網。對於律師履行責任係至關重要嘅。律師會亦都支持諮詢文件內保護律師喺處理國家安全事務時免受個人資料遭到非法披露同騷擾呢個建議嘅。咁以下落嚟咧，我就交俾我身邊副會長湯文龍副會長啦，佢亦都係對外律師會對外事務常務委員會嘅主席Roden。
好，各位傳媒你哋好。大家可以喺我哋個畫面度見到啦。其實就住一啲定義啦、用字嘅涵義啦，同埋呢啲罪行嘅適用範圍嘅。咁如果政府喺草擬法例時咧，其實佢可以進行一啲澄清啦，或者更具體咧係界定同描述嘅建議啦。咁我哋覺得啦係可以幫助市民了解更多嘅。咁例如有幾項嘅就係煽惑離叛罪下對公職人員嘅定義啦，攝取國家機密罪行嘅元素，國家機密嘅部分類別嘅含義同埋適用範圍。例如社會發展嘅意思、煽動嘅意圖啦，同埋相關罪行嘅元素。咁我不如喺度講講煽亂、叛亂、煽惑叛變同埋離叛呢啲罪行嘅。咁政府喺諮詢文件入邊提到啦， 有關煽動叛亂罪行啦，刑事罪行條例第200章，亦都係現行第9(2) 條例，已列出唔屬於煽動意圖嘅情況㗎啦。咁對公職人員嗰方面嘅定義啦，係咪是否適用於煽惑離叛罪啦？我哋希望政府可以作出一個澄清嘅，就喺呢個諮詢文件第4.5段嗰度。咁對於一啲批評政府嘅作為或者行為係唔係構成煽動意圖嘅相關罪行呢？咁喺將取決於具體嘅個案嘅實質事實嘅情況嘅。咁律師會係同意建議條例下啦，冇可能列出煽動意圖嘅相關罪行嘅所有嘅情況。但係如果建議條例之下可以具體地界定同埋描述呢啲罪行嘅元素咯，以免呢啲罪行呢被用作針對一啲政治言論或者其他形式嘅意見表達啦，我哋係覺得會有幫助嘅。咁至於喺竊取國家機密同埋間諜行為嗰方面啦，政府亦都提出啦國家機密嘅定義嘅。喺定義方面啦，控方係需要證明啦，喺冇合法嘅權限下啦，係披露嗰啲機密啦，同時亦都係嗰個機密同埋披露相當可能危害國家嘅安全，以及啦嗰啲機密屬於文件中定明嘅7類中嘅1類或者多類嘅秘密。咁我哋預期咧建議條例草案咧會採用呢個方法啦，去定義呢啲擬定嘅方式嘅。咁文件定明其實建議罪行下啦涵蓋咗7類嘅秘密嘅，其中一項咧係關於國家同埋香港特區和社會發展嘅秘密嘅。咁喺社會發展一詞啦，咁如果政府可以列出一啲比較上例子啦，其實我係可以啦，助我哋嘅公眾啦更加理解呢部分嗰個建議嘅。咁政府定明啦，另一類秘密啦係涉及呢個科學同埋技術發展嘅。咁為咗令公眾啦，尤其是商界啦，有更多嘅確定性啦，喺草擬建議條例時啦，確保企業同埋正當商業秘密啦唔會不慎落入呢啲相關嘅罪行嘅涵蓋範圍裏邊啦。律師會係覺得非常之緊要嘅呢樣嘢。商界經營嘅商業環境咧，一定要有一個確定性嘅，我哋認為。咁其他字眼啦，譬如政府承辦商啦、禁地啦，呢個清晰嘅定義啦，亦都我哋覺得係應該有一個清晰嘅定義嘅喺條例裏邊。咁另一方面啦，律師會亦都同意啦，官方機密條例第521章啦，其實已經過時啦。咁亦都有需要啦，係現代化去應對翻呢個國家安全嘅風險嘅。咁我以下落嚟啦，交俾我哋另外一位副會長阿余國堅副會長嗰個。
唔該晒 Roden。落嚟嘅時間，我想講一講關於條例嘅域外性嘅適唔適用。咁律師會認同喺制定國家安全嘅本地法例嘅時候咧，係應該就危害國家安全嘅罪行定明適當嘅域外效力嘅。但係點可以喺建議條例裏邊得到嘅域外效力生效，同埋點樣喺香港提出起訴，亦都存在一啲疑點。咁希望政府喺草案做草案嘅時候咧，要仔細考慮頭先我上述講嘅2點。就完善訴訟程序咧，我哋睇到政府喺今次嘅諮詢文件裏邊咧，提到希望完善一啲訴訟程序啦，包括減省某啲程序，令國安嘅案件可以盡快排期審理。呢個就係按照佢哋嘅諮詢文件裏邊嘅第9章第19段。我哋要求就而被減省嘅程序咧，希望政府可以提供更多嘅信息。另一方面咧，政府喺諮詢文件裏邊提議未來嘅條例係可以考慮參考有關英國喺恐怖主義案件假釋條件嘅一啲法例。 咁律師會係希望政府可以提供更多有關呢啲類似嘅規定嘅細節啦。建議條例應該適當咁樣考慮被告人喺調查期間嘅權利，同埋控方需要積極主動咁樣管理案件，即係諮詢文件嘅第9章13段裏面提到嘅內容。咁兩者係需要取得一個平衡嘅。咁落嚟嘅時間，我交翻俾會長啦，講一講公眾利益嘅辯護啊。
唔該啊 Chris。咁頭先喺我開場白都提到啦，喺公眾諮詢文件裏邊咧就冇正式提出一個公眾利益辯護，即係所謂 public interest defence 呢個概念嘅。但係咧，我哋都要留意到坊間喺過去嗰幾個禮拜咧都有唔少嘅討論嘅。究竟需唔需要加入一個明確嘅公眾利益作為一個辯護嘅理由嘅？咁律師會認為呢個討論係非常之適當嘅，咁亦都需要有一個充分嘅研究同埋作出深入嘅法律分析嘅。當中當然係包括相關辯護理由嘅法律責任同埋舉證責任嘅。咁如果政府啦，香港律師會建議啦，如果香港政府真係考慮引入公眾利益作為一個辯護理由嘅時候咧，可以建議政府不妨參考加拿大嘅一個模式。加拿大咧嘅模式就係一個當地嘅資訊安全法裏邊咧有一個公眾利益辯護嘅一個條文嘅。喺加拿大呢一個框架之下咧，如果一個被告能夠證明公開某啲機密信息嘅公眾利益係超過咗保密有關信息嘅公眾利益，咁就有可能作為辯護嘅理由嘅。加拿大資訊安全法咧，同時亦都要求一名被告如果想用公眾利益作為辯護理由嘅時候，亦都要符合其他嘅一啲要求嘅。首先，被告披露信息嘅目的係為咗揭露其他人喺執行公務時所犯下嘅罪行。另外，佢事前需要採取法律要求嘅一系列步驟，包括向相關嘅官員同埋機構報告有關嘅事宜，而相關部門並未有喺合理嘅時間內作出回應，咁呢一個辯護理由咧，先正可以引用嘅。咁去到呢一度咧，我分享就差唔多啦。
用英文去 recap 一下。
好啊。Maybe I should recap. Not exactly the full the submission we've made, but some key points I would like to recap in English. The Law Society of Hong Kong today issued a submission in response to the government's consultation on the Basic Law Article 23 legislation issued on 30th January 2024. The Law Society attaches great importance to the work of the Basic Law Article 23 legislation, and we have carefully studied and analyzed the contents of the consultation paper from different perspectives. I must, however, emphasize that as the consultation is on the principles for Article 23 legislation, and there is no bill yet, our current submission is on those principles, and we await the bill of the intended legislation for a more in-depth review. First of all, we agree that the enactment of the legislation on the Basic Law, Article 23, is a necessity. It should be given priority and be completed as soon as possible. Meanwhile, ensuring national security and safeguarding the rights of Hong Kong residents is not a, quote, zero-sum game, end of quote. These two concepts can definitely coexist. I have full confidence in the fine judicial and legal tradition in Hong Kong, and therefore a reasonable balance be maintained between the two concepts. During the process, a balance needs to be struck between discharging the constitutional duty on the one hand, and on the other hand, giving due safeguards to the conduct of everyday lives of Hong Kong citizens and business activities, and the rights protected under the two international covenants, namely the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, of which the provisions are applied in Hong Kong. Among other things, we welcome the recognition of the government of the vital importance of the legal professional privilege in the context of enactment of Article 23 legislation. For a lawyer to discharge his or her duty, it is essential to ensure that his or her non-disclosure of content protected by legal professional privilege does not constitute an offense. We also support the protection of the legal profession from unlawful disclosure of personal data and harassment of lawyers in their handling of national security affairs. We have also put forward various comments for clarifications for the intended legislation, such as the use of the word, quote, document, close quote, to cover electronic copy, the meaning of, quote, public officer, close quote, for the offense of, quote, incitement to dissatisfaction, the elements of the offense of, quote, theft of state secrets, the meaning and the application of various classes of secrets, clarification of any overlaps with the offenses of the current Hong Kong national security legislation, as well as the elements of the offense relating to, quote, seditious intention. We note the government's suggestion to eliminate certain procedures to improve procedural matters. We ask for more information on those procedures which are proposed to be eliminated. In considering procedural improvements, the rights of the accused pending investigation, including their rights to bail, as well as proactive case management on the part of prosecution, should be given due consideration in the proposed ordinance. In simple terms, a balance needs to be struck. On the proposal to have a public interest defense, we have to take into account the legal burden and/or the evidential burden to be discharged before a defendant is in a position to adduce such defense. If the government is considering to introduce a public interest defense to the legislation, the government could have a look into the Canadian model, which is the Canada's Security of Information Act. The Canadian Act requires that the defendant establishes that the public interest in disclosure of the information outweighs the public interest in non-disclosure, and the defendant's purpose in making the disclosure is to review an offense committed by another person in their official duties. Furthermore, the defendant has to follow a series of steps of prior disclosure to authorities necessary before making the public disclosure. That's a very high-level summary in English. Thank you.
會長，你想唔想即係最後作一個總結，即係就住我哋呢一個意見書？
好啊，唔該。咁我用翻廣東話做一個總結啦。23條立法受到香港以至國際社會嘅高度關注。喺諮詢期裏邊，甚至更早嘅階段啦，律師會一直都唔同嘅界別，以至關注立法內容嘅海外人士同香港外國領事啦，同埋商會啦，解釋23條立法背景同埋澄清嘅一啲誤解。同時，我哋亦都有好細心咁聆聽佢哋嘅意見。香港律師會作為一個專業法律團體，會積極表達同反映業界對立法內容嘅意見同建議，務求令到有關條例能夠平衡市民嘅法律權益，符合社會最大嘅利益。我亦都想借呢個機會指出啦，今次政府呢一份諮詢文件呢，花咗唔少功夫啦，背後睇得出有好多法律研究嘅工作嘅。 特別咧喺比較法例有好多嘅內容放咗喺諮詢文件嘅。咁樣做係方便咗社會各界，特別係法律界咧，就住一啲立法原則提供咗唔少意見。我可以咁講啦，呢一次嘅諮詢文件咧，比2003年當時嘅諮詢嘅資料更加充足同埋更加詳盡嘅。我哋希望香港律師會呢一份意見書可以俾到有關當局有建設性嘅建議啦。當草案正式出台嘅時候，香港律師會會再一次仔細咁研究相關條文，以香港本地立法角度為依歸，就點樣可以完善法例條文，從法律角度向政府提供進一步嘅意見。多謝各位。
唔該晒會長。好，以下落嚟係發問時間。請你發問之前呢，講出你所代表嘅機構。有請綠色衫呢一位女士。
SMP, 3 questions. First of all, you just mentioned that the Law Society have talked to foreign consulates and chambers. What are their major concerns, and are they confused about this legislative proposal? The second question is, would you elaborate more on how to protect defendants' rights? And do you agree to extend the detention period on certain offences? The third question is, what's your stance on the offence concerning unlawful duelling? Do you think it would force Hong Kongers who have foreign nationalities to give up their Chinese nationality? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. You actually have a number of questions. I see whether I can remember them. The first one I think is to do with the consulate generals in Hong Kong or the chambers of commerce, foreign chambers of commerce in Hong Kong. As I said at the speech and also Roden's speech, yes, it's true that we've been meeting on an informal basis with the representative from the consulate generals from different countries. The main purpose is simple. We want to assist them to understand the background of Article 23 legislation. Obviously, it is a constitutional duty stated under the Basic Law. I always remind them that the Basic Law was promulgated back in 1990. So it's already 34 years ago when the constitutional duty was expressed. It's always there. So I spent a bit of time to explain the background of the Basic Law and also the government's previous attempt in 2003 to legislate Article 23. And obviously, they have a lot of questions. The legislation is per se is not a very simple thing. It covers a wide range of areas. So we spent a bit of time in clarifying different aspects. I think the main message I got from meeting with all these consul generals or representatives is that not a single one denied that it is a constitutional duty for Hong Kong to enact a national security legislation under Article 23. I have not heard any views to the contrary. Secondly, I think there are some genuine concerns about the legislation. For example, some of the definition of terms, of which Roden, Vice President, has explained in slightly more detail. Some of the terms, because this is not a bill per se, this is only a proposal, so it's normal, it's quite natural that people are concerned that how wide this term will be covered. Roden mentioned about, for example, social development, the concept, right? Technology, whether these will form part of the state secret. So these are the things that I have been asked quite often by foreign investors. So that's why we've already reflected these concerns in our submission. I completely forgot about your third.
The second question relates to detention.
Can you elaborate more on how to protect defendants' rights? And do you agree to extend
Like I said earlier, the proposal itself is it's not a bill itself. So obviously we will examine all these procedures or mechanism in more detail. What's the relationship with the current legislation on criminal procedure ordinance, for example? So these are the questions that we will ask the government to provide more information in due course.
And the third question relates to nationality, whether it should be given up.
Yes, concerning the unlawful jury, the offence of unlawful jury, do you think that the proposed offence will force Hong Kongers who have foreign nationality to give up their Chinese nationality?
I don't quite understand the question, but I think the important point is, like I said at the outset, the legislation must strike a balance between national security and upholding existing human rights. So if that's and I have confidence that it can be done with our system. With that in mind, I'm not that worried that people, will be overly worried about the final legislation. I don't know whether that's an answer to your question.
OK， 綠色衫後面啡色褲呢位女士。
Good afternoon. Two English questions from TVB Pearl. First one is, so does the Law Society agree, thinks that the government should include public interest defense in when legislating Article 23? And secondly, why did the Law Society think Canada's Security of Information Act is a suitable reference for the government? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. The first question is to do with the public interest defense. I explained a little bit in my opening remarks that we think that this is something worth considering, and this is not, there's no easy answer to this question. We've looked at the government consultation paper, and we've also conducted some research internally. There are very different models around the world. Even within common law jurisdictions, there are different models. For example, in the US, in the United Kingdom, they don't actually have a specific defense for public interest, defense as such. Whereas in Canada, and to a certain extent in Australia, they do have something like that, a defense for public interest. We've looked at different models, and we think that the Canadian model is of value. We are not recommending that the government should follow the Canadian model, but I think the Canadian model sets out a good reference point if the government want to consider that. The reason being, like I said, always said, there should be a balance struck between national security and human rights. And I think the Canadian model at least provide a suitable mechanism for this matter to be considered. There's a procedure to be followed. There's an application to the government. If the government fails to respond, then the person may use public interest defense as a defense. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying that that's simply transplanting the Canadian model for Hong Kong. I'm not recommending that, but I think that take a look at the Canadian model may help our understanding on the very important issue. Your second question is to do with, I forgot again.
Canadian model.
Oh, sorry.
Canadian model.
I think I've answered that, right?
You've answered the second question, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
the first
you
question is what?
So just I wanted to ask you, so you agree, like, because also like the Bar Association earlier also said they believe the public interest defense should be included in the legislation, but the threshold should not be low. Do you agree with like the statement, or does the Law Society has other like opinions as well?
We don't comment on other bodies' views, but like I said, from our point of view, I think it's definitely worthwhile looking into whether there's a need for this offence, and if the government do decide to go ahead with the Canadian model is a good reference point. I mean, there are a number of issues that we need to look at, for example, legal burden or evidential burden, that sort of things. The whole procedure should be looked at holistically rather than simply saying that, oh, yes, let's have a offence like that. It's simplifying a very complicated question.
OK， 下一個問題，我前面呢位先生。
會長幾位，你哋好明報，我有3個問題。第一咧係喺嗰個針對延長羈押時間嗰度咧，其實即係你哋初步認為咧，原則上係咪有需要？因為喺而家嘅機制當中咧，理論上呢個即係控方咧或者政府當局係可以直接 charge 嗰個人嘅，同埋喺呢個過程當中，你覺得法庭應唔應該即係有一個就住羈押嘅時間要把關咧？第二咧就係個諮詢文件咧，同時提出咗即係可以喺某啲情況底下咧，阻止見某啲律師或者係即係研究去調整呢個法律嘅即係國安相關案件嘅法律程序。原則上咧，你哋覺得有冇需要？尤其喺嗰個法庭程序當中咧，佢即係如果喺過去一段時間發生嘅一啲國安案件個問題出現喺嗰度 translation 啊或者 serve document 呢類咁嘅問題，其實係咪應該即係明確啲講出嚟，係要處理翻譯文或者提交文件呢啲嘢嗰度咧？第三咧就係就住你哋提及嗰個煽動罪咧，尤其係煽動意圖嗰度咧，即係因應即係普通法嘅地區嘅案例嘅發展咧，你哋會唔會認為呢個犯罪元素係應該必須包括呢個證明煽動暴力嘅元素咧？唔該。
多謝3個問題，都係幾技術性嘅問題啦。我諗我譬如我真係一併咁答咗佢啦，因為我諗一個好重要嘅原因咧，就係嗰條法案本身嗰條草案仍然未出嚟嘅。如果條草案出嚟咧，我答應大家啦，我哋會真係逐一條罪行真係詳細再睇多一次，先會較為一個專業嘅一個意見俾到大家。咁喺呢個階段，因為始終係一個建議啦，係一個所以我哋就冇好詳細去每一個罪類去考慮嘅。不過大約嚟講，不論喺呢個保釋也好啦，律師嘅尋找辯護律師嘅權利啦，以至到頭先提到嘅煽動意圖呢一個嘅定義咧，其實3個咧喺世界唔同嘅司法管轄區咧，其實都係遇到同類嘅問題嘅。其實喺好多唔同普通法地區咧，都係經常考慮呢3個問題嘅。咁所以咧，我哋覺得咧，其實係可以參考多啲其他司法管轄區嘅做法啦。喺最後政府個立法嘅文字方面。至於喺具體執行上面咧，其實我喺唔同嘅場合咧，雖然唔係直接牽涉到今次呢一個諮詢啦，其實香港嘅司法機構咧，我都係經常呼籲佢哋咧係可以改善佢嗰個效率嘅。其實如果喺法庭嘅效率得到改善之後咧，其實好多被扣押啊，或者最後判刑之前嘅custody 嘅關押嘅時期就可以縮短咗。咁其實某程度上可以減輕咗我哋一啲嘅問題嘅。咁我諗咁上下。
OK， 下一條問題，前排米白衫呢位女士。
Thank you, everyone. 3 questions from AFP. The first question, I would like to follow up on the legislative recommendations about preventing persons under arrest to meet certain lawyers or delaying their meeting with basically any lawyers. Do you think if that happens, it will create a de facto blacklist of lawyers? And if that happens, how ready is the Law Society to defend the interests of the industry as well as the interests of the person under arrest? Second question is about the, because just now Mr. Tong mentioned when he talks about the government should provide more clear definitions of certain elements of offense, he said it would help to avoid letting the offenses to be used against political speech. But how confident is the Law Society in the upcoming law not being used against political speech given the 4 years in enforcement of the NSL? Is it just a matter of clear and precise wording? And the third question is not exactly about the legislation, but I would like to ask about the update on the investigation regarding complaints against certain lawyers made by the National Security Police. Which stage is the investigation now at, and when are we expecting a result from the Law Society? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I think as to the first question, my answer is it is very clear. Under the Basic Law, a defendant is entitled to legal representation. That's a constitutional right for any defendants. And the Law Society will definitely request that right cannot be taken away. I think that's very clear because it's protected under the constitutional document Basic Law. As to the final wordings of the legislative the bill, when we have an opportunity to look at them, we definitely, especially our criminal law and procedure committee, will definitely examine line by line as to the government's proposal. But I think it's a bit premature to preempt the government's thinking now. The second question is about the speeches, whether it's political or not. That's a general question about freedom of speech, basically. I think again, I repeat my answers given earlier. The two international covenants on human rights are applicable in Hong Kong. So it's under the Basic Law guarantees that the two international human rights conventions are protected. And freedom of speech is definitely one of the important elements of that two international covenants. Like I always said, the legislation, there should be a balance to be struck between national security and the rights protected under that two covenants. And I do have confidence. In fact, many other, I said the answer earlier that Hong Kong is not the only jurisdiction has to face these controversial issues. National security legislation is always controversial issues in any countries, including Western European countries. They all experience the same process. And I think it is good that we have a very thorough consultation before a bill is to be submitted. And that's actually reflected by some of the consul generals. They actually appreciate a very transparent and open process for us to voice out our concerns. And your third question is about, the progress. I mean, of course, today's press conference is mainly to do with Article 23 legislation. We are not to talk about other things. But as to your very specific question about certain complaints to certain of our members, all I can say is we held a press conference, I think, 2 months ago, roughly, to give an update. And at that time, I said that it's still being under investigated, but there are some preliminary results. At least some cases are more serious, that there's a possible breach of our professional conduct rules, possible breach. So we are still working on it very hard because obviously there's a procedure, a due process is important. We deal with all complaints the same manner. So we will give ample opportunity for the respondent, our members, solicitor, to reply to the allegations. So it's a back and forth, so it takes a bit of time. I cannot predict a very clear timeline now, but we are talking about months. Hopefully we will give you a more up-to-date situation. Thank you.
我知道幾位跟住有會議進行，所以呢一個記者會呢個時間到此為止啦。咁唔該晒咁多位。
好啊好啊，你想我坐喺度定點？企起身，企喺前面。
OK， 繼續望正面啦，唔該。OK， 唔該，望一望左邊。OK， 唔該，望一望右邊。